Hi, my name is Matt Ezzell, and I'm a professor of sociology at James Madison University. I'm going to lead you through a short discussion today about media literacy in the 21st century. What is literacy? Broadly, when we talk about literacy, we mean the ability to read and write, the ability to understand and to convey ideas through the written or printed word. But literacy can be applied in many different contexts. When we talk about media literacy, we generally mean the ability to understand how media work, how they produce meanings, and how to use them. Media literacy refers to a set of communication competencies, including the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and communicate information. This is especially important for members of your generation. Digital citizens often referred to as prosumers, both producers and consumers of media. Media literacy matters because of how much media American youth consume. The average young person aged 0 to 8 spends 2 hours and 19 minutes on entertainment media every day. For ages 8 to 12, it's 5 hours and 55 minutes. For ages 13 to 18, it's 8 hours and 56 minutes, not including time spent at school for homework. It's important to note that patterns vary widely. Some young people don't consume entertainment media at all, and some consume a whole lot. But most kids, up to 98%, use some form of media for some amount of time on a given day. This leads us to the 5 fundamental principles of media literacy, important considerations to help us be conscientious consumers of media. Number 1, media are constructions. There's nothing natural about an image. They don't fall from the sky and they don't grow on trees. They are always produced by human beings acting in particular socio-historic and political contexts. And in the United States, the context in which media are produced are often shaped by important considerations tied to race, class, and gender. Number 2, audiences negotiate meaning, but meanings are always structured in dominance. Media are what academics call polysemic. That means that a given media artifact can have multiple meanings attached to it. If I showed the same commercial to a bunch of different people, they would likely take different meanings from it, depending on who they are in the world and what was going on in their lives at the time. However, to say that media are structured in dominance is to say that there will still be a dominant or most likely understood meaning that most audience members will take from the media. Number 3, media have commercial implications. Media are often created to sell products and to influence audiences' buying and consumer habits. Media in this sense is about business and profits and losses. Number 4, media have social and political implications. Media aren't just selling products, they're also selling ideas and values. And again, those ideas and values are often tied up in our cultural meanings about race, class, and gender. Number 5, each medium has a unique aesthetic form. This means there is a style, rhythm, and look associated with different media forms and formats. For example, if you tuned your radio to a hip hop station, you would expect to hear music that sounded like hip hop. Related to these fundamentals, we can also consider the 5 core questions of media literacy. Who created this message? What techniques are used to attract my attention? How might other people understand this message differently from me? What lifestyles, values, or points of view are included or omitted from this message? Why was this message sent? I also find it useful to remember that media matter because they have an impact on us and on our culture. Consider the money spent just on advertising globally over the last several years. If media had no impact on us, would the advertising industry spend upwards of $600 billion this year alone? Doubtful. Media matter. We need to take them seriously. There are lots of different types of media that young people in the United States consume. From books to movies to video games to social media outlets, young people are consuming a wide range of media on any number of different devices. One increasingly prevalent form of media to which young people are exposed that we often don't talk about is pornography. Pornography refers to sexually explicit media, media that includes images and videos of nudity and people engaged in sexual acts. Of course, pornography is intended for adults, but we know that many young people have been exposed to it. It's important to know that pornography is both real and not real. It's not real in the sense that what it depicts is just one version of sex and sexuality. And it's often a version of sex and sexuality that doesn't match up to real people's experiences. It often presents a distorted and unhealthy version of sex, which can be particularly confusing for young people. But pornography is real in the sense that the actors who are used in it are real people. The money spent on its production and consumption is real. Pornography is a multi-billion-dollar global industry, and because its consequences for consumers are real. Media studies scholar Paul Wright developed a model for understanding the impact of media on our thoughts, experience, and behaviors. He calls it the 3AM model, which stands for acquisition, activation, and application. The basic point is that media shape the way we see the world and ourselves by giving us scripts. Much like an actor gets a script that directs their words and action on the stage, the social scripts that we get from media tell us what should or should not happen in a given situation, how we should or should not act, and how others should or should not respond to our actions. The first A, acquisition, refers to exposure. When it comes to sexually explicit media, exposure for young people is widespread. By the age of 17, 98% of boys and 83% of girls report having been exposed to pornography. And first exposures often occur quite young. 49% of boys and 23% of girls report first exposure prior to the age of 13, with the average age of first exposure being 11. Importantly, a majority, close to 70% of first exposures for young people are by accident. The young person isn't looking for pornography actively. They may be looking up other information and accidentally follow a link online that includes pornographic material, or they may be shown pornography by a friend or acquaintance. These young people report that these inadvertent exposures are often confusing, unsettling, and frightening. It's also important to understand that curiosity about sex and sexuality is natural. Indeed, it is a healthy part of normal human development. It is absolutely understandable that a young person would have questions about sex and sexuality, and that they might even look to the internet for answers. The problem is that the information and images that they often find are all too often neither helpful nor healthy. It's clear that acquisition, or exposure, is widespread for young people in the United States today. The second two A's, activation and application, mean that the script provided by the media becomes a worldview, or a way of making sense of the world, and that worldview starts to guide decision-making and behavior. In my research, the impact of these sexual scripts is very clear. Pornography can come to shape real-world desires for consumers. As one man I interviewed put it, all of what I have known about sex comes from pornography. This raises the question, what are we learning from these media? Unfortunately, the lessons are often not positive. Across pornographic media, we see a normalization of violence and degrading treatment of women, often coupled with an aggressive and predatory understanding of what it means to be a man. We know that exposure to harsher content is difficult to avoid, and we know that many users' consumption follows a pattern of desensitization and escalation, sometimes becoming habit-forming and experienced as a form of addiction. Why should we care about this? Well, for one, because it's technically for adults. Young people aren't supposed to have access to these media, in part because it can have such an unhealthy impact on them. And related to that, we know that pornography can shape real-world behaviors. It can impact the ways that we understand ourselves and one another, and the ways that we relate to one another. Further, pornography consumption is associated with negative health consequences, particularly for young people who experienced early first exposure. This can include feelings of emptiness, depression, and loneliness, in addition to experiences of sexual dysfunction, dissatisfaction, and experiences of addiction and dependency. Women deserve better, men deserve better, and people in general deserve better. The lessons about gender and sex embedded in a lot of pornographic media are not healthy or based on lessons of mutuality, communication, and respect, the hallmarks of an equal, loving, and healthy relationship. And importantly, something better is possible, and developing skills in media literacy can help us to make that a reality. Now, as a related issue, I want to talk briefly about the issue of sexting, sending sexually explicit messages, photos, or videos through any digital device. Although the majority of young people do not engage in sexting behavior, it is increasingly common among young people in the United States. In research on young people aged 12 to 17, It was found that at least 1 in 4 teens are receiving sexually explicit texts and emails, and 1 in 6 are sending sexts. Girls feel more pressure to send sexts than boys. Boys are more likely to request sexts from girls. More than 1 in 10, or 10% of teens, are forwarding sexts without consent, and about 1 in 12, or 8% of teens, have had sex they've sent forwarded without their consent. Those last two are particularly important to highlight because they express clear violations of consent, and thus they are always harmful. But even more broadly, the research shows that sexting can have negative, unintended consequences, including emotional distress, cyberbullying and bullying, negative self-esteem, shame, and embarrassment, and it could have legal consequences because it's illegal for people under the age of 18 to engage in this behavior. But honestly, the emotional and social consequences are arguably the most distressing. And in thinking about the reality that many young people, and notably many girls, feel pressured to send sexts, it's important to highlight again that the majority of young people are not engaging in sexting behavior. So in that sense, if you feel pressured to send sexts and you don't want to, you are absolutely not alone. And remember, in the face of pressure to do anything that you don't want to do, it is okay to say no. No is a complete sentence all by itself. And this is equally important. If we understand that the pressure to send sexts only happens because someone else is applying that pressure, don't ask people to send sexts. And don't send sexts that people haven't asked for. We can include this in a broader discussion about building a culture of consent. To be meaningful, consent must be an active, clear, unambiguous, ongoing, and negotiated agreement free of coercion, exploitation, threat, violence, or manipulation. The gold standard for consent is that it is sober, enthusiastic, and freely given, with the understanding that it can be withdrawn at any time for any reason. When it comes to consent, it's key to ask, listen, and respect. To wrap up, here are some take-home points. Remember that there is nothing natural about an image. Media are constructions, and media are constructed with an agenda. It is never okay to pressure anyone to do anything sexual. When it comes to media, you are an empowered, conscientious consumer. Understand that curiosity about sex and sexuality is normal and healthy. Understand that whatever experiences you have had, and however you feel about these issues, you are not alone. And know that you can get help from trusted adults, parents and other family members, caregivers, your teachers and other support staff at school. There are people in your life who are willing to help. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time and your attention.